everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another NSX video and a winter rehabilitation project. Well, when we acquired this car in July this year, we really didn't have a lot of issues. Yes, we had to replace the motor mounts and we have this kind of pesky issue with the AC charge, but now that the car is down, we have a lot of opportunity ahead of us to catch up on 30 years of deferred maintenance. And what I mean by that is that the cooling system on this car has all original hoses. And those original hoses are now 30 years old, which could rupture at any point and leave us stranded on the side of the road. Well, instead of facing that issue, we're going to be upgrading the entire car and replacing all of its hoses. We've got a kit from Science of Speed, and we're excited to replace every hose on this car. Along with that, we're going to be replacing the lost motion assemblies, which is a known issue on this car. And we have a really young timing belt. And what I mean by that is we have a 7,000 mile timing belt, but it's over 8 years old, which means that it needs to be replaced. And while we've got the engine torn apart, there's no better opportunity than go ahead and tackle that problem before it leaves our engine crippled. So let's go ahead and get you in on the content. Well, here's the unfortunate truth of what happens when you buy a used car. You've got little gremlins like this underneath your seat and in various different sections of your car that you think is clean and that you think the dealership did a nice detail work on. But you can see here, that's definitely not the case. We've got this huge coffee, soda stain, whatever it is, that was under the seat, and they didn't take the 10 minutes to remove the seat and make sure they got it all when they did the detail work. You could see, and I could tell, that there was something that had gotten spilled long ago. And you know it's old when you find remnants of the previous owner, like their business card or whatever it is, underneath the seat, and you can tell that it's been there ever since because the card wasn't damaged. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and clean this up, and we're going to work our way into the stereo system, the center console here, and, start work on getting this car back to where it should be. Well, even with a pressure washer, still can't get it clean. I'll continue on this journey until we get somewhere of improvement, but it did actually take a bunch of it out with the pressure washer. Maybe we can slowly work our way towards a goal of having that stain out. Well, after an hour of deep scrubbing with carpet cleaner, 2 different kinds, and an automated drill brush, and all of the carpet cleaning tools at my disposal, I still am battling this area right here. So if you're unfamiliar with this carpet, it's got like a rubber backing, and it's clearly wicked through all the way to the rubber backing. And I feel like I'm just drawing it out at this point, and I'm not actually getting rid of it. So the battle continues, but it does look better than what we originally started with. I mean, you can still see that there is definitely an outline of where the stain is, but it's not as dark and intense as it was. So I feel like I'm getting better. Obviously, I've cleaned the front because that was the easy victory there, but the battle continues here. All right, so let me go ahead and bring you in on the game plan for the NSX's audio system. So we found out that the NSX has pretty good door speakers. It's got focal speakers, 6.5s there, and they're about $400 speakers. So we're gonna leave those alone. But what I wanted to do was restore the functionality of the CD changer in the trunk. So we've got this control module over here from Alpine that allows you to convert the CD changer controls to like a handheld device, and you use the antenna to wire it into the back of the unit. So we'll get an antenna extension that'll allow us to wire it into the back of the head unit over there. We also upgraded the head unit to have Android Auto because the old head unit only had the capability of doing CarPlay. Additionally, we're wiring in a backup camera. This will allow us to navigate out and that's the backup camera right there. We navigate backwards when we have this car on display. It's a little bit difficult to back this car up. You don't have a lot of good sight out the back, so we'll take care of that. But we're going to put the module here. So you plug in the CD changer into this module, and then this is for the out, and we've got the wiring going across here to power that. And we're going to go ahead and wrap up the amp over here and the subwoofer. So we went ahead and upgraded the subwoofer to a higher audio classification, if you will, of subwoofer. It comes with a 4-inch from Bose. It's the same 4-inch diameter, but we're dropping it to 4 ohms and running it with the Alpine amp over there. It works really well. I've tested that out already. And we've got the backup camera already tested. So really now what we're doing is making sure that everything functions correctly before we crimp all the connections. And then we're gonna find the backup signal so that we can activate that backup camera. After that, then we're pretty much putting everything back together and we should be good to go. So we're going to go ahead and button back up the NSX after we've got everything installed. So we ended up finding a lot of great opportunities to tuck everything away. So we have the Alpine amp tucked underneath the carpet, the sub put back in its original factory location. I think we're going to keep the CD changer underneath the e-brake handle for now, just because it seems like a convenient way to like just locate that. It comes with a remote, so it's a great opportunity for us not to like physically mount anything, but use the remote to be able to change the tracks. And the remote will live here along with some of the other like remote options that we have for this car. So everything has been cleaned back up and we are slowly installing all the panels. We got to take the carpet and install that, but we're getting real close to having the interior buttoned up. Just a few more final touches to get it nice and squared away here. All right, so here's our double DIN setup. This double DIN setup has Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. It also has the ability to play videos. You can do some mirroring with your cell phone if you want to, but the cool thing is that we have the ability to also install a backup camera, and our backup camera, which has a sheet over it right now, will allow us to put the car in reverse and automatically see what's behind us, making this car, which is traditionally more difficult than a normal car, to back up or parallel park. Well, so that was pretty easy. All you have to do is measure your dimensions and then cut this out. Once you cut that out, you can approach it however which way you want to. The previous owner had them leather wrap this, and so we installed this new double DIN Pioneer head unit, but they had a double DIN already in here, which made modifying it and making this fit that much easier. So you can do this very simply by just tracing out and then slightly dremeling around the edges, making sure that you keep the frame centered. Not a lot of hard work there. If you wanted to leather wrap this is pretty simple too. All you have to do is take a sheet of leather, which you can get on Amazon. You could probably even use vinyl, which this might actually be from like Joann Fabrics or Hobby Lobby. And then you just use some glue and overlay it on. Not hard at all. But what's difficult here, I will say, is how do you keep the functionality of your sub that's located here? Plus, you want to have a good speaker setup for your mid-range and your vocals. So you got 6.5s there, which is pretty easy. But behind us, right in this location, is a speaker that is a odd size. And so what we're going to be doing is upgrading that. But we also have this right here, which is an Alpine RF converter CD shuffle controller. This matches up perfectly with the NSX's OEM CD changer and allows us to control the CD changer by pumping it through the stereo. All right, and so here's our setup here. We have our Alpine control unit controlling the CD changer, and we are going to go ahead and turn that off so that we don't get demonetized. But that pumps through the head unit using the antenna. So it's not FM over a frequency, it's literally connected to the back end of the head unit using the antenna. So while yes, it's using FM band, you don't have to worry about static or kind of any degradation of the sound because it's all plugged in directly. Now, while you don't have like high fidelity on the sound, you definitely have the ability to control it and you get pretty good audio from it. So it's certainly not as good as like a Bluetooth connection, but in Vermont where we live, we have a lot of dead spots. And so if we wanted to listen to music, it's very difficult to not have a more analog based audio system. So that's why we did this. But it also is good because when you pop the trunk, you can see that there's a factory 6CD changer there, which is kind of cool to still see that. So that's how we went about doing that. Well, one of the things that we're going to be doing on our NSX over winter is replacing literally every cooling hose on this car. When we took a look at it and we examined some of the weak points of this car, we noticed that it was still running the original cooling hoses that were almost 35 years old at this point. And so to prevent any roadside maintenance, aka towing it back, we got this wonderful kit from Science of Speed. And at this point in time when I'm filming this, cost us about $750, but literally is a complete kit for your NSX. All right, so we're at the front of the car, and if you're unfamiliar with the NSX, it is a mid-engine car, which means that the engine sits behind the cabin and has to push the coolant all the way to the front of the car to get cooled off and then loops back around. That means that there are a lot of cooling hoses that we're gonna have to replace. It goes all the way from these pipes right here to the ones in the cabin for the heater core, all the way through the middle section of the car, and then back to the engine where there are a bunch of hoses. Well, as you look at these hoses, they look really good on the front side, but as you get progressively more towards the rear of the car, those hoses are the ones that really need to be replaced. If you think about it, there's not a lot of heat up here. There's heat dissipation going on, but back towards the engine of the car, it contains a lot of that heat and holds on to it, which then bakes the rubber and the threads, which allows them to kind of degrade at a faster rate than the front of the car. That means that those ones in the back are really super brittle. So we're going to be replacing all of these, and it's pretty simple. What you do is you identify the hoses, you put a little slit into them, and then what I like to do is stick like a flathead screwdriver like this to pry them a little bit. That widens the gap in the cut and allows you to easily get these hoses off. If you think about it, 30-year-old rubber is pretty much bound and binded to those aluminum pipes, which means that you're going to have to really struggle hard to get it off. If you're never going to use those hoses again, just put a little slit in them, widen the gap. It allows you to take those hoses off without a lot of energy. So there are a few tricky hoses once you get towards the firewall section here. So we've got the heater core, we've got one that goes right here, but the main one that's going to be a challenge for us is this hose right here. This one goes up and over the electric power steering and kind of connects into a T over on the left side. Well, that's going to be really challenging to get, so we might not be able to show that, but we're going to try. Otherwise, it's a pretty straightforward process. And how I do it is I take all the clamps and the hoses, the old ones, and I pull them off and I leave them here so that way I know where they went. So on my right side of the car, I have those over here. And then on the left side of the car, I have this one over here, and they correspond to the location. That allows me to match up the hose, identify where it was, and easily reinstall it. My clamps are all right there, so as I bring my new hoses over, I take those clamps off and I put them on over there. So let's go ahead and get started on this. So we're ready to install the new hoses. If you use a little bit of silicone on the inside of these, they should slip a little bit easier over. This new rubber is going to be really tight to squeeze on. You can try it, but odds are you're going to need some silicone. That will definitely make your job easier and help you along the way. So for the most part, the hoses pretty much line up with a partner. The only one that I found that which is a little bit ambiguous is this hose right here that comes off of the valve for the heater core. These two hoses are seemingly the same length, seemingly the same diameter, but they have different part numbers. So to match this up correctly, we're gonna have to do a part search online. Now, I do find that a little bit inconvenient about this SOS kit is that they don't have really good, simple instructions. I think there's an assumption that the consumer can really line this up or that this work is gonna be done by a shop. So if you go into this project, just know that you might have to do a little research to figure out which hose aligns where. But other than that, everything's going well. So here we have our new hoses in on the left and right going into the radiator and back to those pipes that go through the center of the car. The difficulty with these huge hoses and the tight tolerances with the new rubber requires a little bit of silicone to get them on. It's a bit of a struggle, a bit of a wrestle to get them placed in the right area so that they seat all the way up. And what I mean by that is if you look over here, specifically on this hose, you have a white dot and then you've got like this little line orientation mark here on the radiator. This needs to go all the way up and align with the clocking so that it's on right, but also on enough. And so that is the part that you have to wrestle on, and especially when you get one side on, you have to wrestle with the other side. And because it's flexible, it doesn't really allow for good leverage. Now, if you kind of twist and shimmy, and use a lot of silicone, you can get them in place. So it is doable for the consumer, but just know you're gonna have to wrestle with those. It will be interesting as we get further back how much of a struggle it is. Through some simple Google searching, we were able to find out that this is the correct part number for this, whereas this goes to the oil cooler located in the back. So if you're confused by that, simple solution here, this one, this part number in the back, this part number in the front. We'll go ahead and get that installed. I wanted to take a minute real quick to show you why this is so important. So this maintenance is critical because usually what happens is one of the hoses underneath the car that run through the center or in the engine bay lets go, which then leads to, coolant going everywhere and your car potentially overheating in a catastrophic way. Well, this hose right here, I was having a hard time matching up because I thought that it was a bigger diameter as well as has a round kind of curvature to it. And it turns out this hose right here is the appropriate hose replacement for this. This hose had swelled so much, it had actually started to deform and lose its integrity. So this is just like a warning, kind of a PSA, if you will, for these hoses to be replaced in a service interval. Now, 30 years is definitely not that service interval, but you should be routinely checking the condition of your hose to make sure that they don't rupture in a way that's going to leave you stranded, or worse, leading to more repairs, because this hose is relatively cheap, but this engine is not. All right, so we've got the hoses all in place. It actually wasn't that bad. These hoses are so form-fitted that you kind of have to bend them and get them up to their respective pipe connection points. In doing so, that accordion gives you some extra push to get it over the end of the pipe here. So all in all, not that bad. The smaller one is certainly the more difficult one, and then I would say the middle one. So in order from top to bottom, being this one, the last one is the easiest. So all you have to do is make sure that your hose clamps are fitted in the correct orientation clockwise so that you can clear the body panel that goes underneath here. We're going to make sure that the hoses and all the connection points as well as our fittings right here don't leak, so the panel will remain off for the first start. So now that you've seen the front and the middle section, it's time to address the ones that are in the engine bay. So most of them are centralized right around in this region. There's a couple that come up through the center. So as those center pipes connect back in, there's a couple rubber ones right there. Now we'll see how that goes. I'm going to be dropping the lower section of the frame out anyways, because I have some additional work I want to do on the engine this year. But most of the rubber hoses for the coolant connect into here, into this region down here where the thermostat is, and then the corresponding pipes that connect everything to the front of the car. So you can center a lot of what you're going to do over here, but there's also, especially if you have an automatic, there's a oil cooler for the transmission over here that I understand has a specific coolant pipe that we have to replace. And then also over on the right-hand side of the engine, so as you're facing it from the back, obviously, on the right-hand side over there, there's going to be the oil cooler, and there's some hoses that go to that. So while most of it's over here, just realize that there's going to be some that kind of float to the back portion as well as over to the oil cooler section. In the SOS kit, they give you the what they call the figure 8 O-ring. It actually looks like an 8, and that is for the oil cooler. You physically have to remove that, which is kind of a turnoff for some people doing this job because of like the wariness of what it's like to remove an oil cooler. I don't think it's that bad. I think that the common DIYer can do that. Remember, you're just accessing the areas and replacing the hoses that connect to them. So if you can remove a clamp, you can undo a bolt, you can remove a gasket and replace it. That's what we're talking about here. Nothing too overly complicated, other than you might have to do some work to gain access to these areas. One of the things that was talked about when this car was posted for sale was some of the concerns around the engine. Now, I looked at the service records, and the service records told the story. So even though we see things like this on the camshaft seals, we know that this was an ill attempt to try to stop the camshaft seals from leaking when it was serviced at the dealership. So anyone who is familiar with any Acura Honda product from the 90s knows that their Achilles heel when it comes to camshaft seals is the ones at the end here. And more importantly, there was an old theory where you would glob a lot of Honda Bond on there in an attempt to basically stop it from leaking as much. And so you see people of that old school mindset of let's go ahead and slather on some Honda Bond, doing something like that on what would otherwise be a beautiful engine bay. So this right here is going to be easily remedied when we go ahead and take the valve cover off. We're going to do a valve adjustment. We're going to replace the seals, even though they were replaced not too long ago, about 7-8 years ago. And we're also going to address one of the other Achilles heels, which is the VTEC solenoid gasket. And so we know that this one is leaking just a little bit. It's seeping. And so we're going to address that. There's also one over here. So each head has one. So we're going to replace both of those. But interestingly enough, this isn't really a problem. So even if you did buy this car when it was posted and you were concerned about somebody's work here, it's just an old school approach to solving a problem. So I want to bring you in on some of the action going on here. So what you can see right here is a hose that goes to the lower part of the throttle body. Plus we have this big hose that leads to the front of the car. You see the black that's on here? This is actually decayed rubber that has mated onto here after temperature variations over and over from the years of having this hose sit in one position, heat, expand, cool, heat, expand, cool. And that repeated cycle is basically your hoses checking out over time. So if you see that your hoses are like this, they are far past their service interval. These need to be replaced. Should have been replaced long ago, so we're glad that we're doing this. This is actually so baked on that it's going to take a Herculean effort to get this off. But we will make it look just like this one over here with some elbow grease. Well, I apologize that we can't get a great view the whole time that we're doing this, but I will kind of bring you in as I work through this process. And you can see right here is where we have the thermostat and the housing for that thermostat. Your engine coolant temperature sensor is right there. And we have a couple of adjacent sensors that are the sending for the temperature to the gauge cluster located around the corner. So these bolts right here are what holds on the housing to the thermostat. So if you were going to replace the thermostat, that's when you would do so. We also have these hoses located in the back right here. These will have to come off as well. So with just 2 bolts removed, now you have access to the thermostat. If you're going to replace the thermostat, I recommend you use a OEM one or at least a high quality aftermarket manufacturer like Molly or Nippon Denso, etc. So let me go ahead and show you the OEM thermostat and its part number for this car. All right, so here is the OEM part number for this car. It's also the same as the Acura Legend. So if you have a couple of Hondas kicking around, you might have this already on your shelf like I do. And we'll go ahead and remove the old gasket. We'll also take care of the sealing surface here, as we can see that it is kind of let go over the years, which is no surprise. I believe this might be the original thermostat. All right, so as we work our way from the back of the engine or the front of the engine, as we work our way from the front of the engine around to the back here, you do have to remove a fair amount of like tubes and electrical harnesses just to get down into this area where we've got some uniquely formed hoses. And we will go ahead and take some of those off. You can see there's one right there that kind of comes out with the black piping that leads around to the front over here. So that one we've already removed. That also has the breather for the back. And so now we've got this one right here. There's a one below it. And then there's on the automatic versions, you have this cooler pipe that comes up for the transmission fluid, and so those have to be replaced as well. So you can see I've got one of the harnesses or the clamps off of it, and so that will allow us to get access and cut those off. So a lot of cutting. We also took the opportunity to take the VTEC solenoid off of the front. We're also going to do the back one here, and we're going to contemplate seeing what the condition of the lost motion assemblies are once we pop the valve covers off. I want to make sure that we've got everything squared away here first and we don't run into any big issues. We're also going to take the O-rings out of the injectors. They have a tendency to leak over time, so this is a good opportunity to just address those. So one of the things that I wanted to show people is you don't have to buy Honda OEM parts. And what I mean by that is this pulley right here, which is for the air conditioning compressor. So one of the things I wanted to show people is you don't have to buy expensive NSX parts, because this bearing on this pulley for the AC is bad, but this part with the bearing is over $175. But this bearing, which is just an NTN Japanese bearing, specifically 6203 LU, is $7. So wouldn't you rather just keep this, press it out, and then spend $7 for the bearing? Just make sure you use a high quality, reputable brand bearing, and you'll be fine. It's kind of silly to spend so much money just to buy another pulley when this is perfectly reusable. So we've got our new Nachi bearing here. This is a Japanese high RPM rated bearing, and it's going to go back into our AC idle pulley tensioner assembly here. Now, one of the things that I want to note is that you want to make sure that you have this nice and clean. It's not too important when you push the bearing out because you're not worried about, obviously damaging that used and old bearing. But on the way in, you definitely want to. So I just typically find the appropriate socket size, like this one would be too small, to push on the outside of the bearing. That way you're not pushing the bearing and putting stress on the actual ball bearings that are inside of this. So I'll show you how I do that, but needless to say, we're just trying to find the right one that lines up. This one's just a tad too small for my liking, so we'll find another one here, and then we'll just put it in the shop press over there to get it to seat in. But you want to make sure that you've got it nice and level. You can see I've got it a little bit higher on this side, so we'll knock that down a little bit so that it goes in smooth. You don't want it to hang up on any corners, but essentially it's a pretty easy process, and this one might be the perfect one. So we'll get it all lined up here and push it in. And what we're looking for is the bearing to be fully in the pulley, but not too much pressure on it. Okay, let's take a look at that. It's better to not go all the way than to go over. We'll do that. Check that bearing. See if we still got movement on it. It should be nice and tight. We shouldn't have any gap on the back. That feels pretty good to me. We'll just examine it, make sure that it's seated correctly, but this should be good to go now. And it only cost about 10 bucks to do that. So much better than the NSX price for a new pulley, which is, I think it was close to $100. And with shipping nowadays, you're probably going to pay over $200. So got a nice, smooth, and refreshed bearing. All right, on the alternator side, or the timing belt side, we've gone ahead and removed some of the covers here. We've got our front oxygen sensor wire harness disconnected, and we've gone ahead and removed the tensioner just to check the bearing on that, which we found was a bit dry and likely needing to be replaced. So we went ahead and pressed that out. We'll go ahead and start to prep this area so that we can get the alternator out. The alternator is pretty easy. Your tensioner is over here, and then you want to obviously remove the through bolt that goes over here, disconnect the wire harness, and then remove that. We also want to make sure that we've got the appropriate room, so we'll likely be removing the engine mount over here and looking to support the engine because we're going to be removing the front mount as well. That way we can gain access to the alternator, I'm sorry, not the alternator, but the AC compressor. We want to go ahead and remove some of the O-rings on that side and service that now that this system is depressurized. And then we'll be looking at the wiring harness over here to see how we're going to maneuver that out of the way. It's tight space to get the timing belt in. I think it's doable. Well, I know it's doable, but we'll try to make sure that this is easy as possible. Right now, going pretty well. We'll be looking to also set the engine at TDC on #1 cylinder, so we'll take a look at that. So down here, we'll have to remove our oil cooler to replace some of the additional lines for the cooling system. And then we'll also have to set our TDC to #1 up here. This is your crank pulley. The crank pulley needs to be removed. That's a 19mm socket. We've got a weighted one, so we'll just zip that off. But it has a white mark on the the pulley here that will allow us to know when we're at TDC. So we'll have to do that. All right, so what we were able to do was turn the engine clockwise till we got to this white mark and lined it up on that little pointer reference. And what that should do is put our number 1 cylinder at TDC. Now we'll go ahead and double check that reference by looking at the cams and making sure that they're on their reference marks when we go ahead and remove the valve cover. But if you're looking for TDC, it should be this white little reference mark lined up with the arrow above. All right, so I'm bringing you in on the first set of cylinders on the front end of the engine. We've got 2 camshafts, and each camshaft has its own valve set and rocker arm assembly. Between the 2 adjustment screws with the nuts on them, you can see that there's like a little cylinder down deep into the cylinder head, and that is your LMA. This one happens to be the hydraulic ones, and so it's recommended to upgrade those to the spring ones that don't degrade over time and then cause engine fatigue. So we're going to be upgrading those along with a bunch of other things, but that's what it is that you would be looking at. All right, with the passenger rear wheel removed, we will have to now locate the oil cooler right here and disconnect the cooling lines that go up and to the top of the engine. These are the last lines that we have to remove. Also, we're going to be removing the cooler itself. That way we have access to the timing belt and the pulley here. That way we can go ahead and remove the timing belt and replace that. So just 2 bolts that hold it on, or 2 bolts it looks like that holds it on, maybe 3. Definitely one right here and then up at the top. And then it'll easily come out. We will obviously cut the hoses. Don't forget to disconnect your sending unit line right here. It's just a 1 lead that goes up into the back of the valve cover. It's held on with a screw, and so you just pull the boot back, and in my case the boot was missing, so we'll go ahead and replace that. But simple as that right there. Well, you definitely want to make sure that you have a bucket underneath to catch any coolant. This is the low point, so you can definitely anticipate that you're going to have some coolant leak out. Now, if you're going to remove your oil filter at the same time, obviously you're going to want to have your oil pan underneath. As soon as you detach this unit, that's when the oil is going to come out. So I'm doing it in order of operation: coolant, then oil, just because that's going to be easier, I think, to mess with than do oil and then coolant. All right, we've got the oil cooler off over there, and this is the famous figure 8 gasket that goes on those 2 pipes right there next to the pulley. And you can see on our car, at some point it was leaking, and somebody likely did not clean up after it, because the gasket itself is still in pretty good condition, which makes sense since the timing belt was changed not that long ago. So the rubber's still malleable, as well as it was sealing correctly from what I can tell. None of that is fresh. That is all old, baked on stuff. What we're going to do is clean that up, let this continue to drip for a little bit. That's all coolant right there into our drop pan underneath. And then we'll come back up and we'll remove this crank pulley bolt. And if you don't have a weighted socket, I highly recommend that you get one if you're going to be doing this routinely, because that is put on with a lot of torque. You either need to have the crank pulley holder or the weighted socket with an impact gun. Impact gun is obviously a lot easier than trying to do it by hand with the crank pulley holder. All right, so we know that from our inspection that whoever did the timing belt last time did not put the front bank into time. It's at least one tooth off, possibly two, but it looks like just one, thankfully. Our next task is to remove this belt from the car completely. That requires us to put a wrench on the timing belt tensioner bolt. We're going to rotate it 180 degrees. That'll allow us to push down on the pulley and the bearing, which will allow us to remove the belt. From there, it really doesn't matter that this is out of time right now, because we put our crank in time, and the crank in time is going to be more important to be accurate at this point, because what we need to then do is take the camshafts out. We're going to service the lost motion assemblies, and then we're also going to replace the cam caps and seals. Even though they were just replaced, because we got to remove them anyways to do the lost motion assemblies. The kit comes with all new seals, might as well do that anyways. Funny enough, the back cams are in time, and arguably that's harder to do because you need an inspection mirror to do that. So you got to like really incrementally get that one correct, and inspect it, and then you got to put the timing belt on, and then you got to inspect it again. It takes arguably a lot more time to do this accurately than the front. So I don't know how they screwed that up, but they ended up doing that, at least one tooth. And that's why it's important that once you put the timing belt on, that you turn the engine by hand a couple of times, because what you're going to find is that the belt may show the inaccuracies of your alignment. So you get everything in alignment, you put the belt on, and you hope that you get it right. But if you don't turn the engine and then re-inspect, and sometimes you have to turn the engine a couple times because it takes up the slack. So we'll go over all that when we put the belt and the cams back together, but very interesting discovery. And this is something I see a lot. When I did the initial timing belt on the Legend over here, it was off by one tooth as well. And so if you don't do your due diligence to make sure that those cams are lined up, especially with the crank, then you get that situation. So that'll do it for this episode of the NSX rebuild and restoration project we've got going on. I did want to end on a note, which is the belt that you saw in this video, the 2008 Honda Unita belt that was manufactured in Japan. I've called and confirmed with Gates that the T231 belt that you can acquire from Gates, there's two different manufacturing facilities of Gates. There's one in the US and then there's one in Japan. These two belts are made in the same factory in Japan. And more importantly, you can call Gates to confirm the date of your belt. They do not want you using any belt that's past 8 years old, even if it's just been sitting on the shelf, because rubber degrades, the materials can degrade over that time, and it needs to be stored in a climate-controlled, low humidity situation, and if that's not, that can fasten the degradation of the belt. So this belt right here is only 2 years old, gives us a little bit peace of mind. If you go through Honda, you definitely want to make sure that you check the date on those belts, because they are made in batches and in limited batches, whereas these are made more frequently. So that's why we're going to be using this. This is an example of when not using OEM products sometimes is to your benefit. You avoid potential catastrophe, as well as you get a warranty with that belt, as opposed to this belt you don't get a warranty on. So that'll do it for this episode, and we'll go ahead and catch you on the next one when we start to dive in deeper and replace the lost motion assemblies on this C30 engine.